Hi everyone, this is Professor Tannenbaum, and we're just going to be looking today at a brief overview of classical conditioning. So, classical conditioning is very different from operant conditioning because operant conditioning deals with voluntary behaviors. Classical conditioning only deals with involuntary reactions. And so what's really happening when we undergo classical conditioning is that we are learning to associate one stimulus with another. So for example, if you have ever been driving in your car and you aren't really hungry, but then you see McDonald's or Starbucks or whatever place it is you like, and now you're hungry and you're craving those fries or that frappuccino or whatever, it's because you have learned to associate the sight of that place with the taste of the food. So in classical conditioning, in the vocabulary of classical conditioning, a stimulus can be pretty much anything. Something you see, you hear, you think, whatever. But a response in classical conditioning can only be one of two things. It can be an emotion or it can be a bodily reaction. So it could be sneezing or blinking or a rush of adrenaline or something like that. So what's going on when we actually engage in classical conditioning is that we're going to take two stimuli and we're going to pair them together. The first one is a neutral stimulus. It is something that by itself you kind of see it or hear it and go, whatever. But we're pairing it with something that is an unconditioned stimulus. Unconditioned means unlearned. And so this is a stimulus that can lead to a response with zero prior learning. So an example of this would be if you get hit on the head, it's going to hurt. It doesn't matter if you have been hit on the head before. It doesn't matter if you know it's coming, it's going to hurt. Same thing, if you turn off the lights, your eyes are going to dilate. If you have enough caffeine, your heart rate is going to go up. Doesn't matter if you've ever had caffeine before, it's going to do it anyway. So a lot of you have heard of Pavlov's dogs. He got them to salivate when they heard a bell. So we're going to use a similar example here. Some of you may have cats, and if you do, sometimes those cats get really excited when they hear the sound of a can opener. Now the first time they hear a can opener, it's like, it's a noise, whatever. But if that noise is consistently paired with yummy, delicious cat food, well, now that leads to a reaction all by itself. That cat doesn't have to learn to like the cat food. First time it has that cat food, you've got a happy cat. And so the conditioning occurs when we consistently have the can opener followed by the cat food. And eventually what's going to happen is that can opener, it's not neutral anymore. It is a conditioned stimulus right now, and it leads to a reaction without even needing the cat food. That cat just hears the can opener and it gets excited because it knows what's coming even before the food actually arrives. So this is what the basic process of classical conditioning is all about. Now, in the example that I just gave you, the conditioned response was identical to the unconditioned response. So in both cases, you had a happy cat. But in other cases, it's not identical, but it's related. So for example, if you were to snap your fingers and then hit somebody, I don't know why you would do this, and you shouldn't. But if you did, when you hit them, they would feel pain. But if you keep doing this, after a while, when you clap your hands, they wouldn't actually feel pain, but they might feel fear or anxiety. So it would be related to the unconditioned response, but it would not be identical. We also know that not every conditioned response is equally strong. So part of the strength will depend on frequency of pairings. Is that can opener paired with food 5 times or 5,000 times? The more often they're paired together, the stronger that response is going to be and the harder it's going to be to get rid of it. It's also going to depend on timing. So it'll work best if you have the can opener followed immediately by food. If you run the can opener and then give the cat food, 45 minutes later, it's not going to make that connection. And then finally, we have to look at the intensity of the unconditioned stimulus. So if somebody eats a food and it kind of just doesn't taste very good, the next time they look at the food, they might be like, whatever. They might not like it very much. But if they eat the food and it's the nastiest thing they've ever tasted, then next time they see that food, they are going to have a much stronger conditioned response just because it was such an intense stimulus that first time around. And the key here, when all is said and done, the reason that the conditioned stimulus is what it is because it becomes a reliable signal that the unconditioned stimulus is coming. So that cat consistently learns that every time I hear the can opener, I get food later on. Somebody might know that every time I eat at McDonald's, that food tastes good. And so they might start to have the sight of McDonald's be a conditioned stimulus that reminds them of the tasty food that they always get when they go there. So we're going to go through a couple of examples here just to give you some practice with this. So the first example is we have Joe. Poor Joe, every time he hears his boss's ringtone, he gets tired and annoyed because he just knows he's going to wind up working all night long. Now, there are different ways you can approach these when you're trying to figure out the different components. Personally, I usually find it easiest to start with the conditioned stimulus and response and then work my way backwards. So in this case, we could say, okay, the conditioned stimulus is hearing the ringtone, and his conditioned response is feeling tired and annoyed. And if we work backwards and we say, well, what's going on here? Why does he have this reaction to the ringtone? It's because in the past, whenever his boss calls him, he winds up working all night. And that leads to him feeling lousy the next day. That's an unconditioned response. You don't have to learn to feel lousy after an all-nighter. It just happens when you work all night. But he had to learn to be annoyed every time he heard that specific ringtone. So I'm going to give you one more example in here. Apparently this guy Joe has very bad luck, but he once got food poisoning from bad shrimp, and now he feels nauseated whenever he sees shrimp. So I want you to try and see if you can identify the conditioned stimulus and response, and then work backward to the unconditioned stimulus and response. So just pause the video for a moment, jot down your answers, and then come back when you're ready. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to do this for yourself, just to test yourself. And if we look here and we see what's the learned reaction in all of this, what's going on here is that he has learned to feel nauseated and basically just grossed out when he sees shrimp. Well, why would the sight of shrimp bother him? It's because in the past he saw shrimp, it was bad, and that led to food poisoning. You don't have to learn to get food poisoning from bad shrimp, but you do have to learn to feel grossed out or nauseated when you just see shrimp. Whether you got this right or wrong, I will tell you right now that it is always easier to understand classical conditioning when you've gone through a number of examples for yourself. So I really do encourage you to do this as some informal self-testing. Give yourself a lot of practice. That way, if you have questions, you're able to come back and ask them rather than being overconfident when you get to an exam. So a couple more terms that you do need to know related to classical conditioning. One question is, well, what happens if the cat hears other can openers? And so this is where we get some terms that are the same words that we learned for operant conditioning, but they have a different meaning. So in classical conditioning, generalization is when somebody responds to the original stimulus and to others that are similar. So maybe the cat responds to other small appliances and not just can openers. Or maybe Joe now gets grossed out by all seafood, not just by shrimp. The alternative is we sometimes get what is called discrimination. So here the person learns to respond differently to different stimuli even when they are similar. So for example, Joe might discriminate and he might say, you know what, I'm actually generally okay with shrimp except from that one restaurant. I'm not going back to that one restaurant because that's where I got the bad shrimp. And so which one you will have, the generalization or the discrimination, a lot there depends in part on the person's prior experiences. So we might want to know, for example, if that was the first time Joe had ever had shrimp, he's probably not going to want it anymore. Whereas if he's had shrimp a million times in his life, and it was only that one batch that was bad, now he might be more likely to say, I'm okay with shrimp, but maybe not from that one restaurant. The other term that does overlap with operant conditioning, but it does have a different meaning in this context, is extinction. So in operant conditioning, extinction is when the person stops doing a behavior. In classical conditioning, extinction is when the conditioned response goes away. And this is going to happen if the conditioned stimulus is no longer a reliable signal. So for example, let's say you have a kid who they don't have a ton of experience with dogs, and one day a dog growls at them or jumps on them or does something scary. So that kid might develop a conditioned response. They might be afraid of dogs. But if that kid now has the opportunity to spend time with dogs and realize that most of them are nice and cute and cuddly and they don't bark at you and they're not scary, then after a while that kid may get over their fear of dogs because dogs are no longer a reliable signal that you're about to get barked at or jumped on or otherwise scared. So hopefully this has all made sense. If you have any questions, absolutely please do not hesitate to email me or to ask me in class. And in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful day.